I walked into my courtroom the same way I have for decades. The doors opened, Bert announced my entrance, and the usual collection of people with their self-inflicted problems stood up. I took my seat, put on my glasses, and picked up the first case file. I don't look at the litigants right away. Let them stew. Let the reality of where they are sink in. They're not in their living room yelling over a fence or sending nasty text messages anymore. They're in my world now. And in my world, the rules are simple. I talk, you listen. The truth is the only currency that has any value. Finally, I looked up. On my left, a kid. Couldn't have been more than 20. He had that fresh out of boot camp look, a haircut you could set your watch to, and a posture that was a mix of ramrod straight and terrified rabbit. He was swallowing so hard I thought his Adam's apple might pop off. This was the plaintiff, a Private Davis. On my right stood the defendant. Oh, he was a piece of work. A drill sergeant in full regalia, uniform pressed to a razor's edge, medals on his chest, and a face that looked like it was carved from granite and contempt. He had his jaw set, a little smirk playing on his lips. He was trying to project an aura of absolute authority. He looked at me not with the respect due to a judge in a court of law, but with the appraising stare of a superior officer sizing up a subordinate. Big mistake. This isn't his parade ground. The only person in charge here is me. I opened the file. This is case number 724. The plaintiff is Private Michael Davis. He is suing the defendant, Drill Sergeant Victor Miller, for the sum of $5,000 for an unpaid personal loan. I looked up over my glasses, first at the private, then at the sergeant. A loan, from a private to his drill sergeant. My voice was flat. I let the absurdity of that sentence hang in the air. In what universe does a kid earning practically nothing loan $5,000 to the man who holds his entire military career in the palm of his hand? This wasn't a loan. This smelled like an abuse of power. It smelled like extortion. Private Davis, I began, my eyes fixed on him. Look at me, son. Relax your shoulders. Nobody's going to drop and give me 20. Just tell me what happened. In your own words, why do you say Sergeant Miller owes you $5,000? He cleared his throat. Ma'am, Judge, it was during advanced training. I had some money saved up from before I enlisted. My grandmother left it to me. He was stumbling, looking at the floor, then at me, then darting a terrified glance at the sergeant. Stop looking at him, I commanded. He has no power here. The only person you need to be concerned with is me. Look right here. Now, continue. Yes, ma'am. Sergeant Miller found out I had some savings. He approached me one day, said he was in a real bind. His car broke down, and his wife needed a medical procedure, and he was short on cash. He said if I could help him out, he would look out for me. Make sure I got a good assignment after training. I scribbled a note. Blackmail. Simple and ugly. He said he'd look out for you. And you believed him? He's my drill sergeant, ma'am. You do what they say. He promised he'd pay me back as soon as his next check came in. He said it was a loan, just between us. So you gave a man who has absolute authority over your life, who screams at you for a living, $5,000 in cash, with no witnesses and no paperwork, because he promised to look out for you? The logic was idiotic, but the fear behind it was real. I understood it completely. This kid was trapped. From my right, I heard a scoff, a little puff of air. I stopped. Slowly, I turned my head to Sergeant Miller. His smirk was a little wider now. Sergeant, do you have something to add? Perhaps a funny story? Is there a part of stand there and be quiet that was unclear to you? He straightened up, if that was even possible. Ma'am, with all due respect, this is a complete fabrication. The private is a disgruntled trainee. I didn't ask for your defense, I snapped. The crack of my voice made the private jump. I am talking to the plaintiff. When I am done talking to the plaintiff, I will talk to you. You are a drill sergeant. You, of all people, should understand the concept of a chain of command. Right now, I'm the general. You're the private. So zip it. Am I clear? He clenched his jaw. The smirk vanished. Yes, ma'am, he said, the words tight and clipped. The condescension was gone, replaced by simmering anger. Good! Now we were getting somewhere. I turned back to Davis. Did you give him cash? Yes, ma'am. I withdrew it from the ATM over 2 days. The full $5,000. Do you have the bank records showing those withdrawals? Yes, ma'am. Right here. He fumbled with a folder and handed the slips to Bird, who passed them to me. I looked them over. 2 withdrawals. $2,500 each on consecutive days. The dates lined up with his story. All right, Sergeant Miller, I said, putting the papers down and leveling my gaze at him. Your turn. The disgruntled trainee has bank statements. What do you have? He puffed out his chest. Ma'am, the private offered me the money. He saw I was having a tough time, and he offered it as a gift. He was trying to curry favor. It was a sign of respect. He insisted I take it. A gift. Of course it was. A 20-year-old kid gifted his entire life savings to his drill sergeant. The story was so stupid it was insulting. A gift? Sergeant, do you have any idea how ridiculous you sound? This boy makes about $2,000 a month before taxes. And you want me to believe he gifted you more than 2 months' salary because he respects you? Baloney. That's a $5 word for a lie. He took a step forward. A clear breach of courtroom protocol. Bird tensed. Ma'am, you don't understand the culture. In the Brotherhood of the Military, don't you dare lecture me on culture. I cut him off, my voice rising. Don't you stand in my courtroom in that uniform that so many honorable people have worn and try to sell me this snake oil about brotherhood to justify shaking down a kid you're supposed to be mentoring. It's disgusting. His face went from granite to thunder. The mask was gone. This was the real man, a bully who just had his authority challenged and didn't like it one bit. He leaned slightly over his lectern, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. Judge, he said, and the way he said it wasn't respectful at all. You're a civilian. You have no idea what you're talking about. I suggest you dismiss this case before you meddle in things you don't understand. The room went silent. Bird took a half step forward. The audience gasped. He hadn't just disrespected the court. He had threatened a judge. He had threatened me. My face didn't change. I just stared at him. He thought his uniform and his tone of voice could intimidate me. He had no idea what a hornet's nest he had just kicked. He thought he was a wolf. He was about to meet a Tyrannosaurus Rex. I let his words hang in the air for a moment. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I just stared at him. I could feel the temperature in the room drop by 20 degrees. The audience was dead silent. Even Bird was frozen, his hand hovering near his side. The sergeant thought he was playing hardball. He had just brought a water pistol to a nuclear war. I took off my glasses, slowly, deliberately, and set them down on my desk. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the bench. My voice, when it came out, was quiet, deceptively calm. Sergeant Miller, I began letting his name drip with ice. Let me be very, very clear, so that even a mind as profoundly arrogant and simple as yours can understand. You are not in charge here. Your stripes, your medals, your tough guy voice mean less than nothing in this room. They are a costume, and right now, the man wearing it is a disgrace. I pointed a single finger at him. You did not suggest anything to me. You delivered a poorly veiled threat. You told a judge in her own courtroom to back off. Did I get that right? His face was a mask of fury, but for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty appeared in his eyes. He opened his mouth, but I cut him off before a sound could escape. That was a rhetorical question. Shut your mouth. I find your arrogance to be a special kind of stupid. You think because I am a civilian, I don't understand your world. Let me tell you about my world. In my world, we have laws. We have ethics. We have consequences. You have misused your rank. You have extorted money from a subordinate, and you have committed perjury on the stand. And then, to top it all off, you threatened me. You, Sergeant, are a house of cards in a hurricane. He swallowed. The bravado was starting to crack. You want to talk about things I don't understand? I continued, my voice still low but now laced with steel. Let's call someone who does. Let's get an expert opinion on military culture. Bird. I turned to my bailiff. Get me General Thompson at the Pentagon. A wave of murmurs went through the audience. Sergeant Miller's eyes widened. He looked like he'd been struck by lightning. He started to shake his head, a pathetic, almost imperceptible motion. There's no need for that, ma'am, he stammered, his voice suddenly 2 octaves higher. Oh, I think there is, I said, not taking my eyes off him. I think there is every need. You see, you invoked the brotherhood of the military. Let's see what the brotherhood thinks of your behavior. I'm sure General Thompson will be fascinated to learn how his drill sergeants are conducting themselves. He's a stickler for honor, hates it when people drag the Army's name through the mud. Bird was on the phone. The sergeant stood frozen, the color draining from his face. The granite complexion was now the color of wet cement. He looked from me to Bird and back again. The predator had become the prey, and he could hear the wolves howling. I watched him. I wanted him to feel every single second of this. Every tick of the clock was another nail in the coffin of his career. This was no longer about a $5,000 loan. This was about a fundamental breach of trust, honor, and duty. He didn't just wrong this private. He wronged every single soldier who wears that uniform with integrity. Bird held the receiver out to me. General Thompson on line 2, Judge. I picked up the phone. Mark, Judith, Shaindlin. I'm fine, thank you. Listen, I apologize for calling you on a weekday, but I have a situation here in my courtroom that I think will interest you. I have one of your drill sergeants, a Victor Miller, yes, Miller, who is being sued by one of his trainees for extorting $5,000. When I questioned him about it, he informed me that I, as a civilian, don't understand the military and should dismiss the case before I meddle in things I don't understand. I listened for a moment. The line was silent. Then, a voice on the other end, cold and hard as a glacier, spoke for a good 30 seconds. I didn't say a word, just nodded. I looked at Sergeant Miller, whose face was now slick with sweat. He looked like he was going to be physically ill. I understand, Mark, I said into the phone. Yes, I have his unit information right here in the file. Of course. Thank you for your time. I hung up the phone and placed it back in its cradle with a definitive click. I folded my hands and looked at the defendant. He looked like a man standing on a gallows, waiting for the trapdoor to open. Well, Sergeant, I said, a grim satisfaction in my tone. The general was very interested indeed. He used some colorful language, the kind you'd probably understand. He sends his regards. He also said to tell you to remain where you are. He's dispatching 2 MPs from the nearest base. It seems he wants to have a personal conversation with you about military culture. He also mentioned something about a court-martial and conduct unbecoming. I guess those are things you do. Understand? I let that sink in. The finality of it. The utter destruction he had brought upon himself. Now, I said, my voice returning to its normal, clipped courtroom tone, let's get back to the small matter of the $5,000 you stole from this boy. Do you have anything you'd like to change about your previous testimony? Any other gifts you'd like to tell me about? This is your last chance to speak a word of truth in this courtroom. I suggest you take it. He deflated. The man who had walked in here puffed up with arrogance and authority simply crumpled. He leaned heavily on the lectern, his head hung low. He looked at the floor. No, ma'am, he whispered, his voice hoarse. It was a loan. I owe him the money. Louder, I commanded. I want the record to be clear. I want everyone in this room to hear you. He took a shaky breath and looked up, his eyes finally meeting mine. They were filled with nothing but defeat. It was a loan, he said, his voice cracking. I told him I would pay him back. I lied. Well, wonders never cease, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. A moment of honesty. A bit late, wouldn't you say? It took a phone call to the Pentagon to get it out of you? That's not repentance, Sergeant. That's self-preservation. And you're not very good at it. I leaned back in my chair, picking up my gavel. The weight of it felt solid, final. Judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $5,000. You will pay Private Davis every single cent you took from him. My court will garnish your wages if necessary, though I have a feeling your employment status is about to change rather dramatically. The Army tends to frown upon extortion and perjury. I looked at the sergeant, a man completely broken by his own hubris. The uniform he wore as a shield was now a shroud. He didn't even seem to hear my verdict. He was staring at the courtroom doors as if expecting the MPs to burst through at any second. I turned my attention to Private Davis. The kid was still standing ramrod straight, but the terror in his eyes had been replaced by something else. A stunned, quiet relief. He looked at me, and for the first time, he wasn't looking at a judge. He was looking at someone who had stood up for him when no one else would. Private, I said, my tone softening just a fraction. You can relax now. You did the right thing. It took courage to come here and stand up to this man. That's a quality that will serve you well. Don't ever let anyone in a position of authority make you believe you are powerless. Got it? Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Good. Now, I have a piece of advice for you. Keep your money in the bank. Don't loan it to people who can order you to clean latrines with a toothbrush. It's a bad business model. We're done here. I banged the gavel. The sound echoed through the silent room. Bird, escort the private out. Sergeant Miller, you will stay right where you are until your associates arrive to pick you up. Bird led a visibly trembling Private Davis out of the courtroom. As the doors swung shut, I was left with the defendant. He hadn't moved. He was a statue of a defeated man. I gathered my files, ready to leave, but I stopped. There was one more thing that needed to be said. Sergeant, I said, looking down at him from the bench, do you know what your biggest mistake was today? It wasn't stealing from a kid. It wasn't lying to me. It wasn't even threatening me. Your biggest mistake was believing that uniform made you better than everyone else, that it put you above the law. That uniform is supposed to represent honor, integrity, and service. You used it as a costume to be a thug and a bully. You didn't just fail Private Davis. You failed everyone who has ever worn that uniform with pride. He finally looked up at me. There were tears welling in his eyes, not tears of remorse, tears of rage and self-pity. He had gambled, and he had lost everything. You're enjoying this, aren't you? He spat, his voice a venomous whisper. I met his gaze without flinching. No, I said, my voice cold and clear. I take no joy in seeing a career destroyed. I take no joy in seeing a man's life fall apart. But I take a profound, immense satisfaction in seeing justice done. And today, justice was done. Just then, the courtroom doors opened. Two imposing military police officers, crisp and professional, stepped inside. They were everything Sergeant Miller pretended to be. One of them held a set of handcuffs. They walked directly toward the defendant's lectern, and at that moment, an even more imposing figure walked in behind them. He was an older man in a dress uniform that was covered in so much brass and so many ribbons it looked like a Christmas tree. On each shoulder was the unmistakable silver star of a brigadier general. He walked with a purpose that radiated pure, undiluted authority. This wasn't just any general. This had to be someone local, someone with clout, sent by Thompson to handle this personally. The general walked right past the MPs and stopped directly in front of Sergeant Miller's lectern. He didn't say a word. He just stared at the sergeant, his eyes like chips of blue ice. The silence was heavier than a tombstone. Sergeant Miller, who had just been crying tears of rage, now looked like he was about to faint. He snapped to attention, his body rigid with ingrained reflex and absolute fear. The general slowly reached up. He didn't break eye contact. He carefully, almost surgically, removed the drill sergeant campaign hat from Miller's head. He held it for a moment, looking at it with a mixture of reverence and disgust. Then, with a calm, deliberate motion, he turned to the MPs. Sergeant Miller is no longer a drill sergeant. He is no longer in a position of authority over any soldier in the United States Army. He is a common thief who has brought shame upon this institution." He looked back at Miller. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of 1,000 commands. "You will remove your rank insignia now." Miller's hands trembled violently as he fumbled with the stripes on his sleeves. It was excruciating to watch. He couldn't seem to make his fingers work. One of the MPs stepped forward to help, but the general held up a hand. "No. Let him do it. Let him feel it." Finally, Miller managed to rip the chevrons from his uniform. The sound of the tearing Velcro was the only sound in the room. He held the patches in his trembling hand, a man stripped of his identity. The general's eyes then moved from Miller and found mine. He gave a short, sharp nod. It was a sign of respect, from one professional to another. Acknowledgement that I had done my job, and now he was here to do his. He turned back to the disgraced sergeant. "You are relieved of duty, effective immediately. You are confined to quarters under MP escort pending your Article 15 hearing and probable court-martial. You have disgraced the uniform. You have disgraced your fellow soldiers. And you have disgraced yourself. Now get out of my sight." The MP stepped forward, cuffed Victor Miller, and led him away. He didn't look back. The general stood there for a long moment, holding the campaign hat. He looked at it, then with a deep sigh, he tucked it under his arm and walked toward the bench. He stopped in front of me. "Judge Sheindlin," he said, his voice resonating with command, "on behalf of the United States Army, I offer you our profound apologies for the conduct of that individual. This is not what we stand for. His actions were a stain, and I assure you we will scrub it out." I nodded. "General, your apology is accepted, though it's not necessary. I wasn't judging the Army today. I was judging a man, and I found him wanting." "You did more than that," he said, a flicker of a smile on his stern face. "You reminded him that accountability follows you, no matter what uniform you wear. We appreciate that." He gave another sharp nod, turned on his heel, and walked out of the courtroom, leaving me alone with Bird. I sat there for a moment, the silence of the room settling around me. It had been a long time since I'd seen a man's entire world dismantled so completely, so publicly, in the space of 20 minutes. It wasn't about the money. It was never just about the money. It was about right and wrong. It was about the abuse of power. A drill sergeant is supposed to build soldiers up, not tear them down and pick their pockets. Bird came over to the bench. "That was something, Judge." "It was justice, Bird," I said, putting my glasses back on and picking up the next case file. "It was just a very loud, very satisfying version of it. Now, who's next? Let's hope it's someone who just owes his neighbor for a broken fence." I've had enough drama for one morning, but I knew even as I said it that I hadn't. In my courtroom, the drama never really ends. It just changes costumes. Bird buzzed my chambers. "Judge, the next parties are here, but there's a complication." "What is it, Bird? Did someone bring a live animal into the courtroom again? Because after the pot-bellied pig incident of '09, my patience is thin." "No, Judge. The plaintiff is Brenda Miller. The defendant is Private Michael Davis." I stopped. I put down the file I was holding. Brenda Miller, the wife of the man who just had his career spectacularly incinerated in my courtroom not 30 minutes ago, suing the victim. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. This was either going to be a colossal waste of my time or the most fascinating display of human delusion I'd see all year. "Send them in, Bird," I said. "This I have to see." I walked back out and took my seat. On the plaintiff's side stood a woman who looked like she had been crying for a week straight. Her eyes were puffy, her face was blotchy, and she was clutching a handbag to her chest like it was a life raft on the Titanic. This was Brenda Miller. She radiated an aura of frantic, misplaced loyalty. She was a woman whose entire world had been built on the foundation of her husband's authority, and that foundation had just been turned to dust. And on the defendant's side, looking even more terrified than he had the first time, was Private Davis. The poor kid. He'd been escorted out a hero and dragged back in as a defendant. He looked utterly bewildered, like a man who had survived a shark attack only to be immediately struck by lightning. I picked up the new file. It was thin, hastily prepared. This is case number 725. The plaintiff, Brenda Miller, is suing the defendant, Private Michael Davis, for $5,000, the maximum amount. The cause? I squinted at the paper. Defamation of character and intentional infliction of emotional distress. I put the file down and stared at Mrs. Miller. The absurdity was so profound, I didn't know whether to laugh or issue a contempt citation for wasting the court's oxygen. Ma'am, are you serious? She drew herself up, a flash of indignation cutting through her misery. Completely serious, Judge. This young man came in here and told lies about my husband. He ruined our lives. He destroyed a good man's career, his reputation. Her voice started to tremble and rise in pitch. Stop, I said, holding up a hand. Let's get a few things straight right now. First, your volume is not going to change the facts. Lower your voice. Second, you are making a very serious allegation. You are claiming that the testimony given in my courtroom under oath was a lie. Is that your position? Yes. Victor Sergeant Miller, he's a decorated soldier, a hero. He would never, ever take money from one of his trainees. This boy, he made it all up to get my husband in trouble. I leaned forward. This was the core of it, the willful blindness, the refusal to accept an uncomfortable truth. She had constructed a narrative in her head where her husband was the victim, and she was going to cling to it no matter what. Mrs. Miller, I said, my voice dangerously even. Were you present in this courtroom approximately 30 minutes ago? No, she sniffled. I was in the hallway. They wouldn't let me in. I was waiting for him. Ah, that explains it. Because if you had been in here, you would have heard something very interesting. You would have heard your hero husband, after a brief conversation I had with one of his commanding officers, admit to everything. You would have heard him say, it was a loan. I told him I would pay him back. I lied. That's a direct quote. It's on the record. It's on tape. She shook her head violently, her hair flying. No, you're lying. You bullied him. You and some general. You trapped him. He would say anything to make it stop. I bullied him? I let out a short, sharp laugh. Ma'am, your husband stood right where you are standing and tried to intimidate a sitting judge. He is a bully. The problem is, he finally ran into someone he couldn't push around. And then he folded like a cheap suit. That's not my fault. That's a character flaw. His character. I turned my attention to the private. Son, did you say anything to this woman in the hallway after the case? Davis, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth, shook his head. No, ma'am, I didn't see her. The bailiff took me right out a different way. So, Mrs. Miller, I said, turning back to her, your entire case for defamation and emotional distress is based on sworn testimony given in a court of law, which resulted in a judgment. Testimony, I might add, that your own husband ultimately confirmed was true. Do you understand how insane that is? You are suing a man for telling the truth. It's not the truth, she insisted, her voice cracking. My husband is a good man. He served his country. Serving your country doesn't give you a free pass to be a thief, I snapped. Plenty of people serve their country with honor. They don't use their rank to shake down kids for their grandmother's inheritance. That's not a hero, ma'am. That's a predator in a uniform. Your husband's career is not ruined because of Private Davis. It's ruined because of Sergeant Miller. His choices, his actions, his lies. She just stood there, tears streaming down her face, repeating no, no, no under her breath. It was a pathetic sight, but my sympathy was limited. Her loyalty wasn't noble, it was toxic. She was an enabler. She was the reason men like her husband thought they could get away with it for so long. Let me explain something about the law to you. Since you seem to have a first-grade understanding of it, I continued, my patience gone. To prove defamation, you have to prove that someone made a false statement that damaged a reputation. The key word there is false. Since your husband admitted the statement was true, your case is not just meritless, it's an abuse of the legal process. You are harassing this young man, who is the actual victim here, because you can't face the truth about the man you married. I looked at her, really looked at her. The grief was real, but so was the delusion. She wasn't just losing a husband to a court-martial. She was losing an entire identity that was built around being a drill sergeant's wife. She was losing her status, her community, her income, and it was easier to blame the kid who told the truth than the man who blew up their lives. So let me ask you, Mrs. Miller, I said, my voice dropping to a serious, clinical tone. Are you here because you genuinely believe your husband is an innocent man who was framed? Or are you here because you're angry, you're scared, and you're lashing out at the easiest target you can find because you don't have the courage to be angry at the person who was truly responsible? She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing silently. My question had struck a nerve. It wasn't an accusation. It was a diagnosis. For a moment, the frantic, defensive anger in her eyes was replaced by a raw, naked pain. The truth was trying to break through the wall of denial she had so carefully constructed. She looked over at Private Davis, not with hatred this time, but with a flicker of confusion, as if seeing him for the first time as a person and not just a symbol of her life's implosion. My husband, she stammered, clutching her handbag so tightly her knuckles were white. He provides for us. He's a good father. He's always been respected. Until he wasn't, I finished for her, until his actions caught up with him. Do you think you're the first wife to sit in my courtroom and defend a man who did a bad thing? You're not. And you won't be the last, but you have a choice to make. You can continue down this path, defending the indefensible, trying to destroy this young man's life to make yourself feel better. Or you can go home, face the wreckage of your husband's own making, and figure out how to salvage something for yourself and your children. I let the silence sit for a moment. This was no longer a legal proceeding. It was an intervention. Your case is dismissed, I said, the words firm but devoid of the usual sharp sting. With prejudice. That means you cannot file it again. Ever. You came in here seeking $5,000 for emotional distress. The only distress I see was caused by your husband's criminal behavior. You are not a victim of Private Davis. You are a victim of your husband. Case closed. I banged the gavel, a softer sound this time. She didn't move. She just stood there, the tears now falling silently. The fight had gone out of her. All that was left was the hollow shell of a woman whose world had vanished. Bird, I said quietly, please show Mrs. Miller out. Bird gently approached her. Ma'am, this way. She allowed him to lead her out of the courtroom without a word. She didn't look back. Now it was just me and Private Davis. He was still standing at attention, looking utterly shell-shocked by the last hour of his life. I took a breath. Private, you can go now. This is over. For good. This time. He looked at me, a deep sense of weary gratitude in his eyes. Judge, I thank you. I never thought. I know what you never thought. I cut him off gently. You never thought you'd get dragged back in here to be sued by the wife of the man who stole from you. Welcome to my world. It's full of surprises, most of them unpleasant. He almost cracked a smile. Yes, ma'am. Now listen to me, I said, leaning forward. You're going to get your money back. But more importantly, you did something today that was harder than any obstacle course they could make you run. You stood up for yourself against a corrupt authority figure. A lot of people go their whole lives without learning how to do that. Don't forget that lesson. And for heaven's sake, son, find a new bank. He nodded, a real smile finally breaking through. I will, Judge, thank you. He turned and walked out of my courtroom. I watched him go, a 20-year-old kid who had walked into the lion's den twice in one day and come out unscathed. He had a tough road ahead of him in the Army, no doubt. The ripples from this would be felt. But he had a core of integrity that would see him through. I sat back in my chair, The courtroom finally empty and quiet. It was a bizarre and exhausting morning. I had seen the worst of human nature: greed, abuse of power, bullying, and willful delusion. But I had also seen the best of it: courage, integrity, and the simple, powerful act of telling the truth no matter the cost. People ask me why I do this job. They see the screaming, the lying, the endless parade of human folly, and they wonder how I can stand it. It's because of moments like this. It's not about the satisfaction of watching a bully get his comeuppance, though I admit that part is enjoyable. It's about seeing the scales of justice, for a brief, shining moment, balanced perfectly. It's about making sure the Private Davises of the world don't get crushed by the Sergeant Millers. It's about cutting through the nonsense, the excuses, and the lies to find that one simple, unshakable thing: the truth. I gathered my files. Bird, let's take a 15-minute recess and get me an aspirin. A big one. As I walked back to my chambers, I thought about Sergeant Miller. He was on his way to a military prison. His wife was on her way to a life she never planned for. And Private Davis was on his way back to his barracks, $5,000 richer and a lifetime wiser. All because of a single decision, a single act of extortion that unwound everything. It's funny, people think the big disasters in life come from some huge cataclysmic event, a tidal wave, an earthquake, but they don't. The real disasters, the ones that ruin lives, almost always start small. They start with a lie. They start with a weakness. They start with a man like Sergeant Miller thinking he's above the rules. And in my courtroom, there's only one rule that matters: nobody is above the rules.